Brian met Naomi on a social networking site, a beautiful, stylish woman who looked at him from the photos immediately caught his eye. He checked the information posted about her and realized with satisfaction that she was single. The same was confirmed by her single photo. Brian wrote a message to the young woman in the hopes that she would respond, and so it happened. Communication was easy, the flirting was obvious, and very soon the young people met in reality. Brian was pleased with their meetings. Naomi turned out to be an interesting, quite liberated woman who knew what she had to do to attract a man. He was not embarrassed by the fact that she was a few years older than him, and 6 months later he decided to propose to her. To Brian's great surprise, Naomi didn't want to marry him, explaining that they still needed to get to know each other, but she agreed to live together. 2 years passed. He was a truck driver, and he had driven his truck all over the country, sometimes being away from home for weeks on end. One day, he was to take cargo to a neighbouring region. He hoped he would be able to return home sooner, but fate prepared a surprise for him. Brian successfully unloaded the cargo and headed back. The road went through the outskirts of a small village, and when he almost passed the last house, something thudded inside the engine, and the truck stopped. It was getting dark quickly. The lights were on in the houses, and Brian thought regretfully that he would have to spend the night here. Putting up the emergency sign, the man went to the nearest house to ask for water. A pretty young woman, who obviously was not even 25 years old, came out at his knock. Upon hearing what the matter was, Shelley, as her name was, invited Brian into the house. It was simple, and even poor in the house, but the woman quickly went into the kitchen and showed her guest where he could take some water. Brian stepped forward and stopped abruptly. There was a child, a boy about 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table. He was in a wheelchair. "Cody, meet Brian. His truck broke down not far from our house." "Hello," said Cody kindly to Brian. "You must be a truck driver." "Well, yes." "I wanted to ask you for water," replied Brian, and smiled at the boy. Then he went back to the truck, ate his last remaining sandwich, and was about to go to bed when suddenly there was a knock at his door. It was the same woman from whom he had taken water. "You'll have to excuse me, Brian. I'm very uncomfortable, but Cody asked me to invite you to dinner with us. We don't have anything special, but he'll be very pleased. He's always liked trucks and lorries, and he even has a whole album full of pictures. You might tell us something about your adventures." Brian was surprised, but agreed, and rummaging on the shelf, pulled out a couple of trucker magazines. "Here, these are for your son," he said. Shelley gave him a strange look and said, "You give it to him by yourself. He will be happy." The evening passed, lively and cheerfully. Brian told various stories. Cody and Shelley listened with interest, sometimes laughing, sometimes surprised or frightened. Cody looked at his guest with all his eyes, admiring his interesting, busy life. Brian fixed the truck in 2 days when the necessary spare parts were delivered. During this time, he became friends with Shelley and her son, so he was sad to say goodbye to them. But from that time on, whenever Brian passed through this village, he would stop at a familiar house, bring gifts, spend a few hours with Cody, and again say goodbye until they would meet again soon. And at home, he unexpectedly began to tell Naomi again that he wanted a normal family. He wanted to be rushing home to his son, and now understood how much joy this could bring him. Unfortunately, Naomi did not share her boyfriend's desires. She didn't want to ruin her figure by getting pregnant, but seeing how persistent Brian was, she finally agreed to become his wife. Brian was happy and confident that this was the first step toward a large and happy family, and after all, How long can they test their feelings? For him, it was all clear a long time ago. Naomi began to prepare for the wedding. She started by choosing a dress and options for a honeymoon. She flipped through pages of magazines for hours, looked at feeds on social networks, and did not think about what Brian would like or want. Finally, the day of the celebration was set. The day before the party, Brian went to see Shelley and Cody. He wanted to convince them to come to his wedding. Cody immediately agreed, but Shelley, trying to hide the tears running down, said that they could not come. But Brian was adamant. Moreover, he announced to them that he did not accept any excuses, and right now he would take them with him. "Mummy doesn't have anything to dress up," the boy suddenly confessed. "She doesn't have a pretty dress." "Cody," Shelley blushed in embarrassment. "What are you saying?" "So it's not a problem at all," exclaimed Brian. "We'll buy everything we need today, and I don't take no for an answer." A few hours later, the three of them walked into a fancy clothing store, and while the salesman picked out clothes and shoes for Shelley, Brian went to buy clothes for Cody. Laden with their purchases, they arrived at the hotel where the wedding was to take place. The room had already been paid for by Brian, and only after his guests had been comfortably accommodated, he went home, reminding them what time the wedding would be taking place. Naomi, in her wedding dress, was simply gorgeous, but for some reason, the modest and inconspicuous Shelley stood before Brian's eyes. The man shrugged his shoulders. What was wrong with him? Then he was already standing in a large foyer among the guests, waiting for his beloved to appear. He looked around, met Cody's gaze, winked at him, and the boy responded in kind. Next to him stood a fragile and somehow sad Shelley. Brian smiled at her. She returned him a sad smile. At this time, Naomi appeared. She walked like a queen, with her head held high. Brian looked at her and admired her. He did not see how Shelley suddenly trembled and Cody turned pale. They looked at the bride as if she were a ghost in front of them. Naomi arrogantly looked around at the guests, demonstrating how pretty she was. But as soon as her gaze stopped on Shelley and Cody, she helplessly opened her mouth as if she had choked on a kick. Then she headed toward them. "You!" shouted Naomi, turning to Shelley. "You came here deliberately to ruin everything. Do you want to screw up my whole life? Why did you come here? Why?" "Naomi, stop. I didn't know you were the bride." But Naomi didn't listen to what Shelley was saying. She kept shouting at the poor woman. Suddenly, quite unexpectedly, Cody stood up, leaning his hands on the handrail of the stroller. "Don't you dare hurt my mother," he said, and looked at Naomi with hatred. "I forbid you." Shelley was stunned to see the miracle that had happened to her son. "Cody, honey, you're standing." "Cody!" Naomi, on the other hand, felt as if she was suffocating with anger. She wanted to hit Shelley with something, but all she had in her hands was the bride's bouquet. Naomi threw the flowers at her and ran out of the hall. But Shelley saw nothing and no one. She hugged the boy, who slumped helplessly and confusedly on the seat. Only now, Brian, like everyone else in the hall, came to his senses. He approached Shelley and asked what he didn't know. "Brian," Shelley said quietly, gathering her thoughts. "Naomi is my older sister. She's Cody's mother. Her husband crashed his car, and he was drunk. Cody was with him at the time of the accident. He only hurt his legs, but doctors said he would never walk again. Cody was very young, and Naomi decided to give him up to put him in an orphanage, and I wouldn't let her. I quit the university, moved into our parents' house and took care only of him. I got used to calling him son, and he used to call me Mom. Naomi never came to visit us. She was building her own life, and we didn't insist. We were quite happy together, weren't we, dear?" "Yes, Mommy," nodded the boy, and Shelley leaned over and kissed him on the forehead. Brian looked around at the guests. They were making noise and talking over each other. Someone headed for the exit. "Dear guests," said Brian, "I ask you to stay and share our joy." He turned to Shelley and said quietly, "Shelley, darling, I beg you, marry me. I will do anything to make you love me and make you happy. And how much I love both you and Cody, I realized only now." Shelley looked at Brian with wide open eyes. She loved him with all her heart, almost from the first meeting, but she could not believe what was happening. "Yes, Mommy, please agree," Cody added, "especially since you caught the bride's bouquet." Shelley only now noticed that she was holding Naomi's flowers. 5 years had passed. Shelley looked out the window and called her eldest son to help. They prepared the dinner table together. Shelley glanced at her watch. "You have a practice at 6, right? You'll have dinner in time. Your father's on his way up. Oh, I see him coming. Run and meet him while I sit the twins at the table." And so, at the big table, Brian was telling his family about how the trip went. Cody, after a quick meal, said goodbye to his father and ran to soccer. The little twins went into the yard to play in the sandbox. Brian looked lovingly at his wife and said, "Well, darling, now tell me, how did you cope with this gang while I was away?" Shelley laughed happily and kissed her husband.